Welcome everybody back to the second installment of the 2025 Grant Wood Country Online Forum, where we gather from various places around Iowa and across the country to be inspired and embrace and engage in learning, conversation, and artfulness, creative writing around all things Grant Wood and Grant Wood Country. So we're so thrilled to have you all here enjoying this community that we've been building over the past 5 years. And we're coming to you from the Cedar Rapids Public Library as our host for this series. Allows us to offer this every year and to beat away those winter blues. And speaking of, and they also have a YouTube channel. And so I want to be sure to mention that last week was our first session, which was a great session with curator Julia Jessen of the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art and University of Iowa's new catalog raisonné director Renelle Knight-Luth, who just gave us great perspective on that massive project that she's embarking on with the Grant Wood Art Colony at the University of Iowa. So if interested in that, you can go to the Cedar Rapids Museum of Arts, Cedar Rapids Public Library's YouTube channel, and it is on there. Click on videos and it should pop right up. So one of the components, tonight we will be having two presenters. Looking very much forward to that. We will be having Paul Jewell and Barbara Feller, both ardent friends of all things Grant Wood, as well as this forum. And just so tickled to have both of them. So what we're looking at tonight is that they'll be presenting, Paul will be presenting Model Citizens, his new upcoming book that will be released very soon. It's called Model Citizens, We Posed for Grant Wood. And Paul will have a chance to tell us about himself and the other books that he's written and kind of his orientation with all things Grant Wood, which is deep and wide. And as well as author of a brand new book, Barbara Feller with Ice Cube Press. And her new book, Grant Wood's Memorial Masterpiece, which she just released at a wonderful event at the Veterans Memorial Building in Cedar Rapids recently. So we'll hear all about that. And since many of you are interested in writing poetry, we're going to be publishing our next Grant Wood Country Chronicle this year, which will include poems and essays and short fiction written by those interested in responding creatively to Grant Wood. And just a heads up that our final session will include our guest, Vince Gutierrez, Iowa's current poet laureate, who is also the judge for the Grant Wood Poetry Award through the Iowa Poetry Association. So that's a really neat creative arm that we have for this forum. And so in that spirit, I would love to offer a poem that is from this book. Thank you, Joe Coffey, for forwarding this to me. It's called Iowa Poets. It was published in 1935, and it has its foreword by J. Sigmund.
Yay!
Yay! Barbara's saying yay. And I would love to read a poem by Ed Rowan, who, is a big name in the Grant Wood Art Colony establishment back in the day. He did a poem called On a Walk with J. Sigmund. And this is so in the spirit of regionalism and the native voices of our area. And so the synergy just leaps off the page with Grant Wood. On a Sunday afternoon, beyond Wabeek, we walked through air flavored with cedar into the rain, drenching so that our blue shirt held your back and arms like the garments of a sculpture. Over a sandy field with arrowheads and bits of ceramic and a poverty-stricken yield of maize and numerous insufferable burrs, which Indian squaws must have complained of while they cooked the meats brought by their braves from the banks of the Wapsie. On into the forest, wet and dark, where you laid your hand on my arm and warned, slowly. The watchful bird slipped noiselessly 6 feet from the next before giving her cue, the noisy ruse of the wing injured and the brave fluttering and chirping into the darker darkness. There on the ground, the nest, achieveless and instinctive art, the little roofed porch, the golden grass woven next the green, the spotted eggs, pigmented wonders, and one hatched, helpless and hungry, youthful red innocence with fuzzy tufts, yet looking like a blind old man, yellow-lipped and lisping. On the way back, with the rain over, in a vermilion-tinted world, you painted out the eglantine, but flower and sunset faded with no word. My mind was on the nest. There I had seen something. So that gives a flavor, albeit, it's a product of its time. We wouldn't choose some of those words for our poems, these days, but that definitely gives a flavor for being on the land in the very places painted by Grant Wood. So with that introduction, I would encourage you to look back in your emails if you're interested in poems and poetry. I included many, many links in the first email I sent out to help you if you're interested in that. And I'd be happy to send that if you didn't receive it, send it again or forward it to who might be interested. But so without further ado, and I'm sorry, Paul, were we going to have you go first or Barbara?
Yes, I'm going first.
Paul, yes, excuse me. So yes, it was just all kinds of pleasure that we have Paul Jewell with us. And I asked him to not be shy and tell him a little bit about about himself and his association with all things Grant Wood and his most current project. So take it away, Paul.
Well, thank you, Elaine, and welcome everybody. About half of you I know from previous Zooms or other aspects of my life, but I'll say a few things about myself too. I live in Iowa City, and during the last 25 years or so, I've been writing spiral-bound Iowa history books. And this is my latest tonight that you'll be hearing some words about. To give a little background, I was doing a book it was called Clear Lake, The Earliest Images in Clear Lake, Iowa. And while I was researching that book in Clear Lake, I ran into a man named John Perkins. And John and Marlis Perkins were maybe in their late 80s or early 90s. So we got to talking, and he said, well, Grant Wood came to Clear Lake the last summer of his life, the summer of 1941, and he painted his last two major paintings there and one lithograph called December Afternoon. He said he came there because he was his secretary and close friend, Park Reinert, had graduated from high school in Clear Lake and had actually graduated with John Perkins. Then he began to tell me these stories about going out with Grant and Park, where they made the paintings, where they lived that summer, all kinds of things. And I thought to myself, these stories need to be told. I like stories, and I thought as soon as John and Marlis, and there's a couple of other people there that knew Grant, as soon as they're gone, nobody's going to be there to tell the stories. So that's when I wrote my first book on Grant Wood called Grant Wood's Clear Lake Summer. Well, then that led to quite a strong interest in Grant Wood. So I wrote another one called Grant Wood Abandoned Plans, which were plans that Grant had made for future paintings and other artworks that he intended to do before his life was cut so short, just in his early 50s. Then a few years ago, I did one on Grant Wood and the Iowa State Fair. And these are three, and now this fourth one, we posed for Grant Wood. There are 4 of the 14 books I've done on Grant Wood. It's really been a pleasure. I feel like I kind of know him now, and I hope that after you hear some of my stories today, you'll feel a bit of that too. So I'm going to go to a PowerPoint, and I hope I can get on it. I might tell you that the cover I chose is a rather controversial. I've shared it with a couple of people. Scott Romine is on this Zoom tonight. He does all of my layout and design. Bonnie did the proofreading on this. Marlis Dunphy, she has also seen the cover, but I hope you'll enjoy it. You can see what I mean, eh? Well, I'm not, oh, here it is. Anybody see up there where it says, I wouldn't have to have it, but anybody see where it says start
Yes.
the,
Yes,
where,
Paul,
yeah,
I see where it says slideshow in the top menu bar.
It's like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in.
Right, slideshow.
It says slideshow.
yeah, no, mine doesn't have that on it for some reason.
Oh,
It has some other things, but it's okay. We can go this way, I think. Is that large enough for everybody to see? Can you see the PowerPoint? Okay, I think we'll just go with it as is. For some reason, my top doesn't say, so we'll go from here. Everybody can see it?
I think it's gonna, it'll be fine, Paul, sure.
Okay, okay. You can see why this might be a little controversial. Actually, this was a photograph that was done by a man named John W. Barry, and it shows a life drawing class at the Stone City Colony and Art School, and the photograph was taken in the summer of 1933. And in the back of the room there, you can see Grant Wood. He's the one in overalls. Another instructor at the colony standing next to him was Adrian Dornbush. And the one on the right in the photo was Marvin Cohn. This book that I've put together deals with some aspects of about 64 of Grant Wood's paintings and other artwork. Now, in doing this research, all of Grant's all efforts were made to be just as accurate and as possible, but occasionally, a newspaper could be wrong. Maybe some of the research in previous books also could be incorrect. But it is a hope in the publication of this book that more aspects of posing for Grant Wood might come forward. I know there are stories yet to be told and corrections yet to be made. But tonight I'll speak about several of these paintings. The first one is a painting called Adoration of the Home. Now, each of these participants have in my book a biographical sketch in the book. This was done early in Grant's artistic works between 1921 and 1922. And of special interest, to me at least, was the fact that some of the models were actually relatives. He used Nan, his sister Nan, as the symbol of agriculture, and a cousin of his, a first cousin, Mrs. R.C. Conybeare, as the center figure. She was Grant Wood's cousin on the Weaver side of the family, his mother's side. She was the daughter of Grant's mother's sister. I'm not going to tell you all of the biographical sketch, but I am going to tell you something that came out of the Cedar Rapids Gazette in 1922, and it read as such: artist entertains in honor of models for mural painting. And the writer said, only in fairy tales are picture heroes expected to come to life. When Grant Wood, Cedar Rapids artist, entertained at his home, 3178 Grove Court, Kenwood Park last evening, the party had all aspects of such a miracle performed in real life. His guests of honor were those whose pictured faces and forms appear in the mural painting Adoration of the Home, which he has just completed and which is soon to be hung on a downtown corner adjacent to the office of Henry S. Ely, for whom it was painted. The mural, which is about 11 feet in length, contains as its central figure Cedar Rapids enthroned and holding aloft the focus of adoring eyes, the home. The figure is posed by Mr. Wood's cousin, Mrs. R.C. Conybeare. The others whom Mr. Wood honored last evening were S.W. Neville, who was the model for two of the figures, the carpenter as representative of the building trades, and the farmer representing animal husbandry. William Funke, the man with the shovel and wheelbarrow, representing labor, George Holmes as the miller, C.L. Charles as the foundry man, and Nan Wood, the artist's sister, who posed as a figure of agriculture. Francis Neville appears as the winged spirit of commerce, Paul C. Hansen as religion, and their little son, Donald, as education. A company of about 30, including the families of the guests of honor, gathered on the lawn in the early dusk to view the completed picture. It was erected at the side of the house with a leafy background of flowers and foliage. Japanese lanterns were suspended from the branches of the oak tree, which formed a canopy overhead, and rugs were spread on the grass for the accommodation of the guests. During the evening, C.L. Charles and Joseph Dennis furnished guitar and violin music. Refreshments were served by Mrs. Hattie Wood, mother of the host, and Miss Nan Wood. Now, Nan Wood, Grant's sister, told of this party in My Brother Grant Wood, a biography she wrote. In it, she writes, when the painting was finished, Grant hung it on one side of our house for the unveiling, attended by models and their families. We sat on blankets in the yard, eating macaroons and ice cream, while Grant trained a floodlight on the painting. It was quite a dramatic moment. Now, just in my research, I thought this was kind of fun. Henry Ely, the man that Grant painted this mural for, had a son named Sturgis Ely, and he actually had attended one of the Stone City Art Colony sessions. But what I liked about it was the writer said, this young man's artistic abilities, according to some, limited his career choice in this field. So he must not have been much of a painter. Huh? The next painting that I'm bringing up here is Spring in the Country And that was one that was completed in Clear Lake in the summer of 41. And as you can see, this shows a farm woman who's digging small holes with a hoe and a young man following her. He's setting small cabbage plants in the holes. In order to keep the rows straight, they've stretched a string between two sticks. Coming over the hill is a farmer plowing with horses. And in the distance, you can see cows munching contently on the first spring grasses. This was the final major oil painting that Grant produced. I'll give you a little example of what I wrote about the models, and I'll tell you about the two people you see in the front. We do have a photograph, actually, of Grant, of a woman named Ida Helen Olin modeling for Grant, but I'm going to go back to the major picture here. The woman hoeing, Ida Olin, was born on October 15th, 1918, and was graduated from University High School in Iowa City. She later received both a BA and MA from the University of Iowa. And at the time she posed, she was continuing to study art and painting at the university and was also enjoying some acting classes. She would eventually study art at the Kansas City Art Institute. In 1941, when the painting was completed, Ida was an instructor with young artists at the University Elementary School and said to be especially fond of landscape painting. She married a man named John Jacob Carson in 1942, and Jack died just 9 years later in 1953, leaving her a young widow with 3 sons. She returned to her hometown and worked at the University of Iowa libraries. Ida was 94 years old when she died in October 2013. She had a son living in Iowa City at the time of her death named John Michael Carson. At one point in her life, Ida lived at 321 Blackhawk Street in Iowa City. And the man, the young man, kneeling, was called William Bill Fry Jr. And he's the one planting the cabbages. He's identified in some newspapers as a friend of Grant's. And I'll show you down here. This was taken on East Court Street in Iowa City. And here you can see Bill showing Grant sketching it, planting the cabbages. And with permission, I colorized this photograph. Bill was born July 1923 in Peoria, Illinois. He was a very athletic young man, being an ice skater champion in 1939 at the age of 15 in Iowa City. And later he played center for a period of time with the University of Iowa Hawkeyes football team in 1943. His father, Bill Fry Sr., was a trainer for the team under head coach Ira Tubbs. The family was living on Chapman Street in Coralville, Iowa, when his father died in 1952. Bill had graduated from University High School in Iowa City. He entered the Army in 1943 and married Judith Jorgensen in 1953 in Coral Gables, Florida. Bill received a degree from the University of Miami that same year. His long career was as an agent for State Farm Insurance, and he died in Miami in December 2002. Just a quick note here. There was a companion piece for Spring in the Country called Spring in Town, and very interesting piece. This man that you're seeing here is named George Devine, and he's the one that that modeled for it. I did some research, a lot of research on this. The actual painting that you see here in the background is by a man named James Shepard. And what he has done in this painting, which is at the Sheldon Swope Art Museum in Terre Haute, Indiana, is he's taken George Devine out of the painting, and you only see his shadow in the painting. I don't know how many of you have seen that, but I found it to be really interesting. Actually, George Devine, I think in about 1972, was headed to West Point to attend the graduation of his son. And he hadn't really seen the original painting before. He had modeled for it, but then the war came on and he left Iowa. So he called the Swope Museum and asked if he could stop by and see Spring in Town. And when he did that, they had a big celebration for him. And part of that festivities was that James Shepard asked to paint him in a painting. And you can see that if you go to that museum. Now, the next thing we're going to talk a little bit about is Grant Wood was in World War I, as many of you know, and he was stationed in Fort Des Moines, in Des Moines. And to make a little extra money, what he did was sketch the soldiers. And he charged a little bit more for officers than he did for, I think he paid a quarter, the enlisted men paid a quarter for one of his sketches, and the officers had to pay $1. So I thought that what I wanted to do was to make sure that some of these were saved. And so I tried to see how many of them were, and I came up with 3 of them. 3 original Grant Woods, and this is one of the 3. And you can see the sketch, and there's a story that goes with that. And this is the story. It came out of the Cedar Rapids Gazette in 1934. It says, when Dr. A.W. McMillan, now associate professor in the Department of Social Science at the University of Iowa, returned home from World War I duty, one of his prized possessions was a sketch of himself done on brown wrapping paper. He framed it and hung it on a wall in his mother's home, explaining to his family that it was the work of one of the men in my company, who was a very likable and talented chap. Recently, Dr. McMillan was making a holiday visit. Now, this is 1934, by the way. And while admiring his cherished sketch, he discovered written below the coat collar in small characters the name of the artist and the date. Grant Wood, 18. The name had become familiar to him and to other Iowans as one of fame in the field of art, and as that of a man recognized nationally for his talent. But in the intervening years, Dr. McMillan had never linked the soldier artist with now famous Cedar Rapids painter. The sketch was made when the artist and Dr. McMillan were serving in the same company at Camp Dodge. It was made with a lead pencil while Dr. McMillan, then a second lieutenant, was typing at his desk, unaware that he was being sketched. Later, Wood presented him with the drawing. Incidentally, during the same years, the subject of the sketch has also received national and international recognition in his field of work. One of his outstanding contributions to social science is a work which he did for the Department of Labor on transient boys on the loose. Now, another one is actually where Elaine lives in Newton, and another one is this one, and this is in the Jasper County Museum, and it is one of a man named Earl Clement. a private in World War I. And they have it in their museum. This is kind of the best picture they could show me, but I think it gives you a good idea of what the sketch is all about. He was a young man during that time at Camp Dodge, and sketch along with a photograph taken near the same time period, and you can kind of see that off to the left, are in the Jasper County Historical Museum in Newton. Clement did survive the war. He returned to his home county following the conflict and lived in the Colfax, Metz, Iowa area. Earl was born in December 1896 near Colfax, Iowa, and married Elsa Swanson in May 1924 in Des Moines. During his lifetime, he was employed at the Parsons Company and was a member of the Newton American Legion. When he passed away in July 1972 at the age of 75, he was survived by his wife and 4 daughters. The daughters donated the wood sketch and other items concerning their father after his death. He was a Lutheran and was buried in the veteran section of Newton Union Cemetery. Now, I found out a few other things, but those were the only 3 sketches that I can find. And I'm hoping that Raynell, who's doing the raisonnier, I hope she can find more of these soldiers. But of course, most of them were probably destroyed or thrown away. I did find one source that claimed some of the other soldier sketches had been gathered together at some point, and it said in it, it included a caricature of Grant's friend Arnold Pyle, and that these had all been purchased by the University of Nebraska Art Museum to travel around as an exhibit. But I couldn't find any more on that. There seems to be no reliable record of this. This one has an interesting story too. This is owned by the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, and it was recently given to them. So let me tell you some things about this. This young man's name was James Beaver Norris. And I emphasize the Beaver because he came from one of Cedar Rapids' most influential families of the 19th century, the Beavers. He's grandson of James L. Beaver and the great-grandson of Sampson C. Beaver. And the eldest Beaver created the Beaver Land Company, which presented to the city of Cedar Rapids the land that is now currently Beaver Boulevard and Beaver Park. This was his great-grandson, James Beaver Norris. He was born in Cedar Rapids in March of 1902. And when he is 10 years old, the family moved to Washington State, but continued to travel to Iowa to look after financial interests. In September 1920, the Norrises made a trip to Europe on the ship Grampian. Now, Grant and Marvin Cohn were also on this ship, along with several other prominent Cedar Rapids families. James' mother was familiar with both of the local artists, both Grant and Marvin Cohn. And James even shared a stateroom with Grant while his mother took the one next to it. It was at this time, the family reported, that Grant made 5 sketches of James, but only one seems to have survived. The other 4, the family said, were said to have mysteriously disappeared before the trip was over. When James' grandfather died, he left a large estate, and James received $1,000, a large sum at that time. He later attended Columbia University in New York and studied architecture. He possessed a beautiful singing voice and sang at numerous concerts in the United States and also abroad before devoting the rest of his life to architecture. He married a Seattle woman in 1936, moved to Beverly Hills, California, and he raised 5 children. This is one that will be familiar to many of you. It's called Sentimental Ballad. In 1940, a movie called The Long Voyage Home was being filmed in Hollywood, and 9 different artists for promotional purposes were commissioned to do portraits of a scene from the movie, their choice. The movie was based on 4 of Eugene O'Neill's short stories and was directed by the famous John Ford. It was said that to have been the first time artists utilized motion pictures for paintings. Although the artists did have a chance to meet the actors they used in their individual paintings, they probably did not always pose for the scene, but used some still photos from the movie. Grant Wood was honored to be amongst this group. The other actors pictured in Grant's paintings were John Quillen, Thomas Mitchell, Joseph Sawyer, David Hughes, Jack Pennick, and Barry Fitzgerald. He's the man seated in this painting. It depicts a group of seamen, including a Norwegian, a Swede, and a Cockney, on shore leave in a Limehouse pub after a long voyage through a war zone. They were trying to survive the loneliness of the sea and the coming of war. Grant said of this painting, he's quoted as saying, "The scene which I selected is that of a group of sailors in a limestone pub. On shore leave, they have been catching up with their drinking. They began to sing, and presently the sentiment of the song overtakes them, and they are all crying in their beer." In the actual movie version, the arrangement was not what I wanted for my painting. Moreover, I wanted to put a strong accent on one of the actors, Barry Fitzgerald, so I completely rearranged the figures, putting Fitzgerald alone at the table while the others standing over him. Then I distorted the figures to get the effect and emphasis I wanted. Grant's painting was begun in California, but finished because of his slow motion method of painting in Iowa City. There was some discussion about the model on the right, Jack Pennick. Some felt this might have been a man named J.M. Kerrigan, but most scholars identify it as Pennick. The artists were told they were free to paint whatever they wanted. Each artist had their own studio on the movie lot and received fees totaling $65,000 plus all expenses. Now, one of these, the gentleman here in the checkered coat with the necktie, of course, you might recognize as Iowa's own John Wayne. Here is, there was another painting done of him by an artist named Robert Feeney. John Wayne, of course, was born in Winterset, Iowa, as Marion Robert Morrison in 1907. But he grew up in Southern California and attended the University of Southern California. At some point in his career, he had acquired the nickname of Duke. His first movie role was in The Big Trail in 1930, but it was John Ford's Stagecoach that made him a big star in Hollywood. He made 179 films during his career and died of stomach cancer in Los Angeles, California in June 1979. For many, Wayne personified the nation's frontier heritage. He did receive 1 Academy Award for his 1969 film, True Grit. He also received, after he had passed, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Wayne had 7 children, married 3 times. One of his grandsons became a priest, and John Wayne joined the Catholic Church shortly before he died. Another one in this painting you might recognize, and that's this gentleman right here. That's Thomas Mitchell. Mitchell had been born in 1892 in New Jersey. His parents had immigrated from Ireland. He became an actor in 1913 and had a breakthrough role in Frank Capra's Lost Horizon. But what I think about him is that 2 of my favorite movies that I've enjoyed over the years was Gone with the Wind, and the other one is It's a Wonderful Life. And he was in both of them. He was Uncle Billy in It's a Wonderful Life, and he was Scarlett O'Hara's father in Gone with the Wind. This is a painting by Grant that is not real recognizable. It is, I located it at the Des Moines Art Museum. Very little is known about the friendship between Grant Wood and Nels Lee. And he used Nels here as a model in his portrait of Nels Lee. They did both teach in the Cedar Rapids Public Schools, but for the most part taught in different buildings. Nels Lee was a physical education teacher at Wilson High School, and they probably met each other through their educational connection. Grant did this portrait of Lee that shows his strong jawline, his blonde hair parted in the center. No one knows why he appears to be wearing a Grecian toga, or whether this painting was done on a commission basis. Not a lot is known about it. But I do know that Nels Lee was a pool manager at the Ellis Park swimming pool for 13 years, and also was active in Junior League Baseball as manager of the Hanford Post of the American Legion team. He'd been born in Jackson, Minnesota, and married a woman named Augusta Anderson in Cedar Rapids in 1928. He had served in World War I and had worked for 8 years at Camp Wapsie Y near Coggan, Iowa. It was at the Y camp that he met his wife. He was the father of 2 sons, Theodore and Herbert. But the sad part of this story is that tragedy struck the family when Nels Lee committed suicide in January of 1957. He left notes before taking his life, and his body was discovered in the family garage by one of his sons, Herbert, as he was returning home after school. And Nels Lee is buried in Linwood Cemetery. Grant's portrait painting of Nels Lee, as I said, is not well known. We do have this photo, however, that I found. It's rather grainy, but here you'll see Nels Lee standing next to Grant Wood in a faculty, I thought it was a faculty photo taken of the McKinley faculty. So this could be where the friendship began. So I hope that gives you an idea of what the book is all about. As I said, there's biographical sketches, but I'm much more into stories, and so I try to tell stories. People have asked me, do you know who this model was? And I don't. I do know that some of the other artists during the summer of 33 did pose for still lifes. I also know that some of the neighboring people around Stone City did some modeling. A big problem for the models, and it's in the book, was the flies and the bugs. And they hired someone just to spray the models to keep the bugs off. It's stories like that that I think people will enjoy as they read the book. It's about 150 pages. Because of the use of a lot of colors, it'll be a little more expensive. I don't have the prices yet, nor do I have books for sale yet on it. But I can be contacted if you would like to know more. I think I'm doing some of the books in color, which will be more expensive. I'm also doing some books in black and white on it. As I said, this is a story that will change. As soon as it's out there, people will say, well, you know, my great-grandfather said this, and, you know, so one never knows. It's not a precise science. We had a joke in Clear Lake, and, you know, at the end of in the life of Buddy Holly and Richie Valens and the Big Bopper, they played their last concert at the Surf Ballroom there. Well, it only holds 1,500, but by some accounts in the area, they say at least 50,000 people have said they were there that night. The same thing could certainly be true here of people that have said they posed for Grant Wood. Maybe, and I've tried to get 64 different works of art for you. Now I'm going to go out of PowerPoint and we'll go right to Barbara. And then at the end of both of our presentations, I think that's the time we'll do some questions. Elaine, will that work?
Absolutely, that sounds perfect. And while Barbara's getting ready, I'll make a quick announcement. Thanks to Audrey Mueller for pointing this out to us. That coming right up on, starting on the 18th this week, the Figge in Davenport will be having an exhibit of Marvin Cohn work. So we want to be sure everybody knows that that's happening. Thanks,
And-
Audrey.
And that runs through June 18th.
Oh, great. Thanks, Paul.
And there's always Thursday is senior day, so it's cheaper on Thursdays. So
Ah, tips and tricks. Thanks again. And awesome. And Barbara, don't forget to let us all know some things about your background that you bring to bear in your books and presentation.
Well, thank you. Can you all see this okay? See, you did it, Elaine, without doing it, right?
There you go. Exactly. Looks good, Barbara.
Yeah. So Paul and I have known each other for more years than we care to admit to. And one of the things that I used to work in museums, and one of the reasons that I loved having Paul was he had a collection of stereoscope cards, and he had some kind of an ability to put them in a projector so that you could see the 3D on the wall. And I loved that. I worked as a teacher and then started in the museum world in 1986, and I worked in the museums for 35 years. So if you're good at math, you know that I'm getting older. And even if you're not good, you can probably tell. Anyway, some of the stories I learned, I thought needed to be shared, and several of them deal with Grant Wood. My first book was actually about the poet J. Sigmund, which is why you may have heard me exclaiming so happily when Elaine showed that book cover and had this poem that included J. Sigmund. And the way I started out learning about him was that I was working in the History Center, and my office was in the archives, and we had an idea that it would be good for me to share with students, this would be probably 4th, 5th, 8th grade level students, what an archives is for and how people do research in an archives. So I came across this box about J. Sigmund, and it had wonderful pictures and a poem and a letter that was written by Mr. Stuckey, who is another story in our family that I won't get into right now. But in this letter, Jay was telling where he was born and where he'd lived and everything. And I thought this would be great for students. They could take out a map. We had maps in the archives and they could follow along. The only problem I had is I had absolutely no idea who J. Sigmund was. So I became rather compulsive, and I now own every one of his books and have read his poetry, his short stories. He's written plays. He even wrote some music. And I became so compulsive about him that I mentioned him I wanted to be an author for children, and I happened to mention him at a table with Steve Semkin, when I was at one of the conferences, and Steve Semkin is the publisher, the owner of Ice Cube Press. And months later, months, because this thing was in the fall and it was right after my grandson Isaac was born, that I got a call from Steve Semkin, and he said, "I remember you talking about J. Sigmund. I'm wondering if you had anything you've written." And I had an article, sent it to him, and he said, "We're turning this into a book." And I didn't believe him. I felt like I was, movie star, like being discovered at a soda fountain or something. But he really did publish my book. And this book then was followed by a book about Grant Wood's childhood, which I also learned about in the museum world when I heard Joni Kinsey giving a history about Grant Wood when I was working at Grant Wood's studio. And that was at the time that American Gothic was showing here in Cedar Rapids. So she mentioned that Grant Wood had started to write an autobiography, but had not gotten past the age of 10. And so I asked her, and she got me permission to make a Xerox copy of this, which was at the University of Iowa. And that became my second book. And now you're about to hear more about my third book. Now I'm calling this Model Citizens Part 2, because I have mentioned a bit about this book, Grant Wood's Memorial Window. The name of the book is Memorial Masterpiece. And I knew that Paul was doing Model Citizens. We decided that's what we were going to call our models here. And so this is part 2. And what I'm going to do is stick to the models that were in this painting of the Veterans Memorial stained glass window. Okay, now my book, Memorial Masterpiece, just came out a few weeks ago. And in it, we hear the story of how this magnificent stained glass window was put together. And one of the things I wanted to do is find out who modeled for the soldiers, because it's not really written anywhere. Who modeled for these soldiers? Who modeled for the woman of peace here? The story begins actually when Grant Wood was in Paris in 1923. He and his friend Marvin Cohn had gone to Paris. They wanted to learn about painting, and painting at that time, they thought you had to be an expressionist. And that was a style that Grant Wood tried to do so he could be a quote unquote real artist. And he set it up so that on his own, he had a gallery display a few years later than the time that he went with Marvin Cohn. And he had this display with 47 of his paintings. They were all from Paris. And he had pretty good reviews of it, but he just couldn't get enthusiastic about the expressionist way of painting. And he didn't know what to do. Well, it happens that Grant Wood was friends with a person who was his neighbor, William Shirer. And some of you will know William Shirer because he became quite famous after writing The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. He was a reporter, and he became much more famous, of course, during World War II. But at this point, it's only the early 20s. And he's talking with Grant Wood. They meet up because William Shirer was in Paris and so was Grant. And Grant tells him, "I just don't know. I think I need to do something different than expressionists." And this window turns out to be the way that he made the path between expressionism and the way we know him now. Shortly after his display, his exhibition in Paris, in 1925, which was 7 years and 2 months after the armistice was signed from World War I, the Cedar Rapidians had decided that they needed to have a special building. They wanted to have a Veterans Memorial, City Hall, and Civic Center combined, and they wanted it to be on Mays Island, which is a little island between the east and west side of Cedar Rapids. It's in the river, partly because the west side and the east side couldn't get along. And so they wanted to, have it be kind of neutral territory. And also partly because in 1924, Cedar Rapids was named the county seat of Lynn County, taking that honor away from Marion, Iowa, who have to this day a cannon in their main park pointed at Cedar Rapids because they were not at all happy about losing being the county seat. So they also may have, put themselves on an island so that they could be protected from attack by Marionites. Part of what they wanted were new buildings to be put in to honor people. They wanted to have this special, these are some of the brochures that came out, special honor to our veterans. And they had announced that they wanted to have 3 parts in this veterans honoring, being able to honor. And one of them was a stained glass window. So Grant Wood wrote a letter asking if he could get the commission to do this stained glass window. And here it is, written December 24th, 1926. He was given the commission in January of 1927. He was given the commission, I believe it was announced on the 23rd of January, so we're, right up there right now. But this came out on the 25th in the Cedar Rapids Gazette, and it's already saying how he wants to do research immediately, and he goes to New York. And he brings with himself a sketchbook, and he designs what he wants to have are these soldiers. He's not exactly sure how he's going to place it, but he wants to honor the soldiers who were in the various wars that we had fought up to that date, which would bring us up through World War I. And he wanted the uniforms to be very much exacting. So he goes in, he has his sketchbook, and he makes a note on the side of one of his sketches. And it says that, it says something about Lefferts. And I looked that up and found this picture, which I think you'll be honest with me. If that's not what he was sketching, then who knows what on earth he was sketching. This looks exact to me. So I think that's why that note was there. And he had a page number and everything. I found this book online. Thank goodness we don't have to travel to all the places all the time nowadays. But there's this painting, this illustration from a book, and next to it is a copy or a picture of showing the sketch that Grant Wood did in his sketchbook and how he's naming all the different colors and trying to get everything exact. Besides the uniforms, he wanted to have faces, and this is where we come to the models. He wanted to have faces that were Iowans. He didn't want them to be recognized as the person that they were necessarily. He just wanted to make sure that he had real Iowan look, whatever that is. And one of his ideas was to use some of the students in his class. Now here you'll see a yellow arrow. That's one of the students that became a model for sure. And as it turned out, as I tried to do research, I found out that there were a couple others in this class and also at Washington High School who had been together. And the thing they had in common is they loved Grant Wood as a teacher, and they were willing to do a lot of work with him. When he opened his studio, when he was given the studio, they actually helped him get it ready, paint it, help him put things together there. But still, nobody really knew who the models were. And at one point, an author who had written this book, Grant Wood's Secrets, said that Nan Wood Graham, his sister, had written these 6 names in a book that was a biography that was written about Grant Wood. And those names were Thomas, Jacob, Sam, David, Butch, and Johnny. So I'm trying to figure out who all the different models are. And I had found a few of them, but not one of them had any of these names. And Terry Van Dorsten, who is the director of the museum at the memorial window, all of a sudden, and this was after the book was almost complete, found this newspaper article. This newspaper article came out on Memorial Day in 1938, and it has given names to the soldiers, just the names. They were just made up names. They didn't have anything to do with who the models were. But what they were trying to do is say, hey guys, we have to move over. We think there's another war coming. So that answered that mystery, but I still had to find out who the real people were. So one of the things I did was go to Terry Van Dorsten, and I also found some by other connections. So the first one that we know for sure is Nan Wood Graham, Grant Wood's sister. This is what she looked like in 1922. A lot different from what you might see, like she was the model in American Gothic, and she certainly looks different here than she did in that picture. And I have found a description in that same book that that Paul was just referring to, My Brother Grant Wood. And she writes this about modeling for that. He considered several ideas for the window before fixing upon the one he would use. At the base would be the life-size figures of soldiers of every American war: the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Mexican War, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, and World War I, known at that time simply as the World War. Above the soldiers would be the central figure, a woman representing the Republic. Although he said my features were all wrong, he decided to use me for the woman model. He would paint a classical face rather than mine. My costume was a problem. He wanted graceful draperies and tried an old sheet, but it was too stiff. After more experimentation, he tried a cotton jersey and learned that putting it on me wet would do the trick. The weather was chilly, and he worried that I would catch cold, so he turned up the heat. Grant really sweated over that drawing, and the wreath I held was so heavy that he had to make a prop so I could use it to rest my arm while posing. And like Paul said, I think these kind of stories make things very interesting. Robert Evans, who was a great uncle to one of the volunteers at the memorial window, and he said, and had letters to prove it, that his great uncle, Robert Evans, was the model for the Revolutionary War. And facilities manager at the memorial building, Charlie Decker, had proof that his father-in-law was the World War I doughboy. Jerome Kriz, Firpo, as he's called, was grandfather to Carrie Kriz, and he was the model for the 1812 Cannoneer. I'll tell you a little bit more about that soon, but Jerome Kriz is another person who was in Grant Wood's class, and Carrie Kriz was somebody who worked with me when I worked at the History Center. And somehow, even though this was quite a number of years ago, I remembered that she said her grandfather was a model for the window. So I gave her a call. We had a great conversation. And during that, not only did I learn how he was the captain of a very prize-winning football team at the high school, but I also learned that he was the model for this soldier from the War of 1812 who's not wearing a uniform at all, who's shirtless, and people wondered, why is he shirtless and who is that person, etc. And lots of theories came up, and it turned out that Grant Wood had learned that cannoneers didn't wear these kinds of shirts, and he has a pole in his hand, and that was used to push the cannon through and make sure that it didn't catch on fire. This last one, whose picture I didn't realize was up because it's behind something I have over here, is Harry Robinson. And I found out about him through an amazing coincidence. I was giving a talk at a church for a group at a church, and I was talking about my second book, which is about Grant Wood's childhood. And somebody asked what my next book, if I knew what my next book would be. And I had just started working on this. So I said it was going to be about the memorial window. Well, this woman in the crowd raised her hand. Her name is Marcia Wickham. And she said, I have an uncle who said that he was the model for all the soldiers. Now, we have learned through Carrie and through Charlie Decker and Bob Peterson, I talked to all of them, and we have proof that there was more than one model. But this one model that had been mentioned by Nan Wood Graham, named Harry Robinson, was a total mystery. I'd gone to the area where you can, the genealogical library. I talked to a lot of people. Nobody seemed to know who Harry Robinson was. Now, Paul Jewell did write me a letter and tell me what he had learned about Harry Robinson, and that was based on a newspaper article, which also thought, like Marcia Wickham thought, that Harry Robinson was the model for all of them. But at any rate, he was her uncle, and that's his picture from a more modern time. So here's a picture of Nan Wood Graham as she looked. And then you can see in the middle what Grant Wood called cartoons. What he did was he would sketch on huge, huge sheets of paper, and they were so big that he had to use the auditorium at Quaker Oats in order to portray them, to get them painted. Then after he would sketch them, then this is the final step, which is in the window itself. He did that for each of the models. Here's Robert Evans. There's that sketch he took in New York. There's a picture of Robert Evans on the high school football team. And there's the cartoon, and there's the final in the window. This is a picture that ended up being part of the picture on the cover of my book. This was taken by the Gazette, showing Grant Wood and his assistant Arnold Pyle as they're painting, or not painting, but sketching these life-size models at the Quaker Oats building. So you can see how huge they are. He had to stand on a scaffold in order to reach it. Well, after he was done and had his cartoons ready to roll, he wanted to find out how to do the best job for stained glass. He did not know how to paint on stained glass or make stained glass, but he was willing to learn. And he ended up going to the Emil Frey Company, the stained glass artisans, and spent time with their group in Munich, Germany from September to November of 1928. Now, these men were great artisans of stained glass, but most of their experience had been making windows for churches. And so Grant Wood was not happy with some of the results because, as he said, they made all these soldiers look like saints. He said one of them even looked like Jesus Christ himself. And he also learned that he had to do a lot of changes to his cartoons. So here you'll see there's a 2-layer. The bottom one has very straight angles because he had originally had curved angles on the pictures, but you couldn't make glass be curvy like that. So some of these cartoons were had to be made over. And here's something out of his sketchbook where he was trying to figure out how he could get Roman numerals to show the year for each of the wars without them being so big that they wouldn't fit underneath the picture. So he arranged Roman numerals in a rather unique way, but he did get permission to do that as long as they mathematically came out the right way. Now, it's very interesting because most people would be a little upset with all these delays that were happening because as he was learning, but he spent his time while they were working on these paintings onto the glass. He spent his time going into the museums, the local museums, and he discovered, well, he hadn't liked Expressionism. He certainly liked these older paintings done by Flemish artists. One of the ones he liked the best was Hans Memling. And this is a painting that Hans Memling had done called Sibelia Sabetha. And I'm not sure that this is the exact one that Grant Wood loved, but he liked them all. And he wrote that he liked how they had all these details instead of this smudgy kind ofness or whatever of expression that he didn't like. He loved these details, and he watched them as they were painting, and he thought of his mother. And when he came home, as he had told William Shirer, I need to paint a different style, he made one of his first paintings, and he was copying this idea. So I think if you look at these three, you can see the step by step. And of course, this is the way he ends up with American Gothic. But this is his mother. And he had never thought of painting his mother. He'd always thought, oh, I have to be in Paris. I have to be painting these scenes. I have to be doing this. I have to be doing that. Until his friend, J. Sigmund, said, no, you don't. And his friend, William Shirer, said, no, you don't. You can paint Iowa. So what happened is he becomes famous. He does American Gothic. He has instant fame. But meanwhile, this is just before American Gothic, but this window has opened up in 1928. It's installed. He does a magnificent job so that there's a reflection of it that goes across the room. If you're ever in, it goes across the entire building. If you're ever inside during the day, you can see the way the sun shines through it. But here's the pamphlet that came out on the program when they opened the building. And you will not see the stained glass window mentioned anywhere. The reason for that is not exactly these ladies. These ladies are daughters of the Union veterans here in Cedar Rapids, but the Daughters of American Revolution. The Daughters of American Revolution were upset that Grant Wood had learned how to make stained glass by going to Germany, who was our enemy in World War I. And they refused and made a big fuss and said, no, you shouldn't be, we can't dedicate this window. they made such a fuss that that window was not dedicated until 1955, which was like 13 years after Grant Wood died. So hardly anybody knows anything about it. Now, one of the things with the Daughters of Revolution is that in 1932, George Washington's birthday had turned into a national holiday. And in 1932, it was a very special holiday year because it's the 200th anniversary. And the Daughters of Revolution, who had stopped letting, they'd made such a fuss that the commission never really gave a dedication, but they decided that they should have something honoring George Washington. And they put this plaque on a tree they planted right across the street on the island, right across the street from where the stained glass window was. Well, you can imagine how unhappy Grant Wood was. And this is one of the only times that I know of where he took his anger out in a painting, and he produced Daughters of Revolution. Now, this painting is so interesting. We can't say who the models are, except for one hand, because he didn't want to get into any more trouble. And he doesn't call it Daughters of American Revolution. He just calls it the Daughters of Revolution. But he kind of combines faces like the ones I showed you from their yearbooks, and how they're having tea and they're honoring George Washington. And they'd made this big fuss that Washington crossing the Delaware should be the main painting that everybody should have up in their schools and everywhere else to help honor the 200th birthday of George Washington. Well, this painting was said to not be historic, and they were not happy about that at all. So they wanted to raise money to make sure that it got shown. It shouldn't be down in the basement of someplace anymore. It should be up there. And so this painting, George Washington crossing the Delaware, becomes the background for this painting, Daughters of Revolution. And you can see that it's a satire. And the only model we know from this is the hand. This hand belonged to Fran Prescott, who had hired Grant Wood to be a teacher and had said to him she really thought he had a great amount of talent. She loved the way he acted with children. And even though he wasn't certified as a teacher, she was very supportive of him and said she would lend him a hand if ever he needed it. So here it is. He's using her hand. Washington crossing the Delaware is an interesting story in itself. And one of the reasons he put it in the background is because this painting was done in 1851 and had a German artist. And it was painted in Germany. And all the models on that boat, though we don't know their names, were German students. He had women, he had children, he had all walks of life. This painting was done because they were having a social revolution in Germany, and they were kind of trying to show Americans had done this, so can we. We can have our own successful revolution. And the flag, by the way, was not a flag at the time that George Washington crossed the Delaware. And this is the Rhine anyways. So this is Grant Wood's way of getting back to the Daughters of the American Revolution, who kind of stopped his dedication. The original sketch can be seen at Coe College. This is a photograph from the newspaper. Marvin Cone is on the left, and that's the president of the Board of Trustees, Owen Elliott, on the right, and you can see that painting. And the story behind the cartoons, after a while, people totally lost track. Where are these cartoons? In 1972, a custodian working at the Memorial Building found these cartoons wrapped up in a in just around some heating pipes. They were in terrible condition, as you can imagine, because they've been there since the 20s. And those were given to the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art and stored away. And then, just about the time I started this book, and I went to see Terry Van Dorsten for the first time, it was the first day that she was opening up these cartoons that she had gotten from the museum. They gave them back to the memorial building. And here we have my friend Carrie Kriz, and there you see her grandfather with the shirtless guy. You can imagine the questions being asked about why he's wearing that hat and why he's not wearing a regular uniform. And she's standing next to the original cartoon. So that is part of the story of the memorial masterpiece. Obviously, there's a lot more. This is the cover of the book, which combines that newspaper picture with the window in this magnificent way. And these are my other books, Road to Wabeek, about Jay Sigmund, and Creation of an Artist, about Grant Wood's boyhood. And all three of those are available at Ice Cube Press. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara and
You are-
Paul. Boy, that is just so much good information. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts to share? Because we can linger. We don't turn into pumpkins at 8 o'clock. We can keep going.
Thank you. Oh,
Yeah.
I see. It's bedtime in Boston, but I didn't know she was there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean that there's just so much to roll around in both of your books. Just lots and lots of detail and just all the research that goes into that and the permissions to get and assembling it all. What a huge undertaking, and we're so glad you did, both of you.
Thank you.
Well, Mary Higby was saying she was involved in a project in Irving, Texas that included 2 of the drawings of the soldiers.
Oh. Did it have the cartoons, Mary?
Yes. It was at the time of the exhibit at the Whitney.
Oh, right.
And so the Whitney got 1, but Irving, Texas got 2.
Oh, nice. How did you rate that? Or how did they rate that?
Well, I had met Terry,
Uh-huh.
and sometimes it pays to know people, I guess.
That's right. That's right.
But that's also where we met Debbie
Uh-huh.
Houston. So it was a program that's focused on the life and works of Grant Wood. And we had lithographs and we had some other regional artists' work that
Mhm.
we exhibited. And
And it was at the same time as the one at the Whitney?
they overlapped a little bit,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah.
And we served corncob jelly at the reception, made in Iowa.
Okay. And Debbie, you say you were at that presentation and Terry was there, Terry referring to
Yes.
the Terry Van Dorsten who helped. Debbie, you want to introduce yourself to the crowd who might not know who you are?
Well, I have yes, and first I'll just say that trip to Irving, Texas, and Mary's being a hostess to both Terry and myself was like a magical trip. It was really a wonderful, Terry gave a presentation on the memorial window, I have a scrapbook that Nan Wood Graham had given me back in the 70s. So I spoke about Nan and just my connection to Grant Wood is that Grant had, as you know, Nan was the youngest of four. The oldest of four was Frank Wood. And Frank married my grandmother's sister in 1911. So he was my great uncle by marriage, not blood related, but they moved from the last place they lived in Iowa was Waterloo. And they moved, my great uncle worked in the automobile and battery business, and he retired and they moved in 1960 to San Diego and to live with my grandmother. So I knew Frank, Grant's brother, very well, and because Nan and her husband Ed lived in California at the time, I also knew more Nan than Ed, but I knew Nan also very well. So that's my family connection to Grant Wood. Is I knew his brother and his sister.
That is just so amazing to me. And we really appreciate your coming to this. And Debbie lives out in California. So she's coming in from a distance.
Yep, and actually, I think Mary was the one that found me. I think this kind of started the ball rolling with me getting to know all of you and being a part of this, which, you know, I was just a kid when Nan and Frank were around, and Frank in particular had quite a bit of artwork of Grant's in their home. I once got in trouble for playing with one of the sculptures of it's the sculpture and last week's, I'm trying to think who maybe it was Joe that showed the little sculpture of Grant's self-portrait of his face. So it's like a little hand.
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
Well, Frank had the plaster cast of or what he used and of that. So I, as a child, had started to play with it. I got in trouble for that. So, but anyway, so I was exposed to all this, but you know, you don't appreciate it at the time. And as an adult now, I wish I had taken more pictures. I wish I had asked more questions. Nan, we talked about, Paul and you, Barbara, both talked about you love the stories. Nan was full of stories. And there were some I would have her repeat to me about a little bird she had named Petey. So anyway, I could go on, but that's who I am. And that's why I'm so interested. You know, I'm learning myself because I'm certainly no expert, but thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. We love having you.
We sure do. I mean, that's it's just kind of an amazing and neat connection and that we get to just keep doing this. And we're so glad you're here each time, Debbie.
Yeah, I look forward to it. And I tell my boss, I said, well, you know, I do this every year. So I have to leave early on Mondays or Tuesdays, whatever. So I zoom out to get home. And so
Oh,
you
bless
guys are
your
a couple
heart.
hours ahead of me. So
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. Oh, Joe's got something going on.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to thank Paul and Barb for sharing your research and for doing what you do. And in these particular books, I love how they both pull the curtain back on real people. And this gives us more trails and relatives of these people. And it reminds us that, you know, the form and function of a painting and the aesthetics and a model, and you're thinking about the angle of the face and all that. That's one part of a painting, but many of us in this forum are so connected to the soil and the people and the region and the hills and the seasons of Iowa, and there's so much more to pull out of Grant Wood's work and the people being forefront among that list. So to focus your research in that way and to document this, what a thrill. I really, really enjoyed it. Great job, guys.
Thank you, Joe.
I think too, with the new catalog Raisonné that's coming, they'll be able to use Barbara's and Paul's information when they write up about each of his works. They can add this kind of little trivia, you might say, but still it'll be something that's probably pretty unique among those catalogs that are being done. So I'm sure she'll be talking to you, both of you, to make sure she has copies of your books. Paul and Barbara, will you, if you get new information or people hear about this, should they contact you once your books are out to say, well, I can add something to that? They've
Oh,
got,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yes.
And there'll be second editions updated.
Well, I kind of envision a copy of my book full of stick-em notes and,
Yeah,
things that people then have told me since it comes out. And I'll share all of those with Renelle, of course, too.
yeah.
I might mention too, and Marlis is aware of this, through our senior college at the University of Iowa, a friend of many of ours, Joni Kinsey, who has just recently retired this past year, she'll be teaching a course on or talking about landscape painting. And some of you might, it's $30 to take that class, meeting 4 times during the month of February.
Are you signed up for that class?
I am, yeah.
I am too now.
And
I'll
it's
see you
on
there.
Zooms. It's on
Yes.
Zoom so that a lot of people can attend. It's not like you have to be there in person.
That's a Zoom.
Zoom, yeah. And she's excellent. If you've never heard Joni, she's just the perfect teacher we would all love to have. The way she explains, it's just, yeah, beautiful. She's just a beautiful.
And you said the emphasis is on all things related to landscape painting, the techniques. Is it a technique?
Yeah, she
Painting
goes
technique?
she
Okay.
goes into like the point of view, like where the author or where the artist is looking towards the picture. She's given this before many years ago when I took it. And it's all American landscapes, the Great West, as well as other places, but just beautiful. You learn a lot about American history from Joni. She knows everything.
She did a senior college course last year on railroad art to encourage people come to the parks in the West on the railway line.
Now remind me, is she the one who's immersed in the curator for Eve Drulow's work there at U of I? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Joni used to oversee the Eve Drulow collection, and I was one of her grad assistants, actually research assistants on the Drulow collection too. So yeah. Yep. Joni's fabulous. I had lunch with her last Wednesday. So right after last week's forum, and she was like, oh man, I missed the forum. I'm so sorry. Right. But we did talk about her class that you guys are mentioning. And yeah, I would totally recommend enrolling in that class. Joni is amazing and fabulous in so many ways. So yeah.
How do you find it? Just University of Iowa?
Yeah, if you just Google senior college, I think at University of Iowa, that'll bring
It's the senior catalog.
College.
Yes.
It's through the Alumni Levitt Center and the Alumni Association.
I
Yeah.
might have a copy of the.
Yeah, I was wondering if I could. I could send the link to
Yeah. My confirmation came from the alumni.seniorcollege, one word, at for Iowa. I don't know if that's,
that's it.
yeah,
Yeah, that's it. I have for Iowa. Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll write it in. Oh, you
I
did.
put it
You
in
just
the
did.
chat.
Yeah, okay.
Oh,
yeah.
good. Thank you.
Thank you, Renelle.
Yeah.
Okay.
The nice thing about the Zoom classes is their limitation on the amount of attendees is large. I don't know
Yes,
where it's 100 or more for sure. Because a lot of the senior college classes sell out or get full if they're in person. The first day, almost, they're so popular. But the Zooms, you can find a lot more openings. So that helps.
Nice. Great. Well, next week we have got coming up Beyond the Brush, unveiling Grant Wood the writer with Joe Coffey, a collector, writer, producer, man of all kinds of things, journalist. So we're very much looking forward to that. Because, you know, yeah, it's interesting because what was it? I was just reading in the Daryl Garwood book this week, and he I think there was mention in that book, Joe, of something about Grant Wood's inclinations towards writing. So I can't wait to hear more about that. You roll around and all that. That's fabulous. So yeah, that's a lens. When we were putting this forum together this time, it's like it just surprises you. It just goes on and on and on. The things that can be inspired and sparked by Grant Wood's legacy and what he touched in his life. And so that's one of the joys of this forum and meeting with all you. And we're not done yet. We got 4 more sessions this season. So if people have got anything else to say, please speak now or hold your peace until next week. So is there any other questions or anything we need to mention among ourselves before we sign off? If not, thank you again, Paul and Barbara and everybody who's here. I'm so happy to have you, and we'll see you next week.